Hello and welcome back to Angular 2 Masterclass with Alejandro Rangel. In this section, we're going to finish writing the code of the component. So we will add the services, the templates, the styling, the links between pages. So hopefully at the end of this section, we will be able to connect all the dots or all the knowledge that we have learned through the entire class. So let's start with the simple one that is going to be the welcome component. So we go to the welcome component and I'm going to copy and paste the code from the final example. It's a lot of code in all of the components, but I will explain the main points in order you to understand what you should be coding when you start learning this example. So for the welcome component, we have a template that will have a Jumbotron. This is from Bootstrap saying welcome to my tunes. And what's important here? First, we are using ngIf. This will hide and show this part. And remember, this is a structural directive. So this is a first thing that you have to remember from ngIf. Depending on if this variable is true or false, this will show or hide. Okay. The next point is that we have a link here, an anchor tag, and we are capturing and handling the click event, calling the function show more info, okay, and passing the value of more info that is true or false, and this will hide or show this area of the template. So where this value comes from? If we remember, if we define a public variable here, we can refer to it from our template. And also we are using here ngIf to change the value. So when we click show more info, we will hide the entire button. So this is everything that we should know from the welcome component. The next component that we will talk about is the footer. This is a simple one also. So I'm keeping the most complex to the end. So let's paste here the code. So we have the selector footer component, and this component is pretty straightforward because we just have a footer from Bootstrap design with different links pointing to the year. For example, here we're using a variable for printing the year that this website is executed. And then we have a link to my Twitter, follow me. We have a link to LinkedIn. Also, you can add me. I'm always happy to have more people to exchange ideas, and I'm really proactive answering every question. And to my website, rangelp.com. So this is everything that this component is doing, and we have styling. We had a dedicated chapter to applying a style to our components. In this case, we are using an inline style. This could be pointing to an external CSS file, but we want to keep our components self-contained. So this is what will style our footer. Then we go to the header. The header is a little bit more complex, actually. So let's go here. Sorry. Yes. So from the footer, from the header, remember that the header will have navigation. So we have to import router and router directive from router. And the header will show the login and the registration buttons depending on if the user is already authenticated or not. If you remember from the section user service, the user service return observable from the get user API. And this will allow us to subscribe here and show or hide the buttons. The search component, we haven't written the final code for the search component, but we will use this every time that we type something for searching and press enter. So let's inspect a little bit in the template. All this, it's from Bootstrap template. And the important part for us is that we are using here search component. So So a component embedded in another component. And we are calling the event, the function search, when the query change happens. This query change comes from the search component that we will see later on. What else do we have here? We show the login button if the user is not present in this application, and also the same for the registration. If the user is already there, we will show the user.email and also the logout button. As we are importing the user service here, we have to specify in the providers that we are using the user service. We have the directives that we need. Remember, a component is also a directive. This is a style that will make our header component prettier. Also, Bootstrap make it pretty, but we need a margin left for every button. And our class itself is not so big, but it has very important tips working with routing. Okay, so in the constructor, we inject our two services, the user service and the router. When the user is injected, immediately we subscribe to the get user. And this is an important concept from Directives, remember from this section, that we subscribe to an observable. Okay, so let's go to user because I want this idea to be clear. If we call get user, this one, it will return an observable, okay? And that means that every time that there is a new user, or if the user is not present, this function will be fired, triggered, and we will get the user. This means that if we have a user, this part of the template will change accordingly to this. This is super convenient, and actually it's brilliant from my point of view working with Directives. When we click in the search and we click enter, in this case we will call the API from the router from Angular 2 and navigate to the albums page, and we will pass as a query the event and the page. Remember from the syntax from the router that this album should match with the route defined in the app component, this one. And the parameters in this case that we are passing are in the URL. Okay, so if you want to recap this concept, please watch the routing section. Finally, we have the login. In this case, we subscribe to the observable from logout from the user service, and we call navigate by URL to reload. So this do exactly like this to reload the page. Okay. So this is the header component. Then we have the pagination component. I'm going to paste the code, 1 second. Yes, so here we are. We have the pagination component. From here we import the a pager. We have a directive, the for range. We need it in this case, and we will get route params. This will get the URLs from the params from the URL, sorry. Okay, so in our template, if the pager is present in this page, we will use the for range to create every link of the pagination depending on the number of pages. This is the reason why we need the for range. This is structural directive. We have the index. Okay, you can check in the directive that we have a local variable name index, and every time that we click in a page link, we will call the function go to page with the index. This will call the route.navigate with the path name, okay, and also with the params. So this is our pagination component. Then we have the search component. In this case, the search component, the important part is that we are going to use the input, the output, and the event emitter. The event emitter is a new concept introduced in this video. So here we have ng model with the double two-way data binding, the banana in the box, using the query variable. And every time that we type something in the keyboard, we will pass the query string, that is the value that is holding the input, and we will pass the band. Okay. The event emitter is used to expose outside our component that every time that our query value change, with these two, we can use the two-way data binding as here, as the banana in the box, outside our component. We will recap this in a second. When we are typing, we check if the key code is 13, so we press enter, and then we call the event emitter here, and we call next to pass the value to every component that is subscribed to the query change event. So these two, it's a way that we use the two-way data binding, and our previous header component was using this here. So every time that we dispatch the query change, this query change is exactly search component. This query change, it will trigger the search and it will go to change the navigation. This way, the search component is not dependent on our URL. So this is a design way to keep our components isolated. So think about this design because it will make scalable your components. This doesn't depend on anything, and actually our header component is just using the search component, and it's attached to the query change. The next component that we are going to write is the albums component. This one is a little bit long, so we come here. Okay, so the albums component is using the onInit, the input observable, the router part, and all our code for handling albums, songs, and so on. It's really important to mention that here we have our we have the pipe, the ellipsis pipe, we have the highlight directive, and our pagination component. Let's see how are we using this. In our template, we are iterating through the entire list of albums that we get from the API. And if you click on, if you click on this element, then we will go to the album. Yeah, remember the album should match to something in the route config, so it's here. So if you click in the row, you will go to the album and we will pass the ID. We are using the attribute directive highlight for highlighting this row. When you hover, it will use a white smoke color, and when it's active, if you press this row, it will be gray. Here we are specifying the source using Angular with the binding section, and we will get the image from the album.getImage. Remember about this, and this is the enum value. As the name of the album could be very big, and this is the case in several examples that I was searching, we are using the ellipsis pipe to reduce the strings to a maximum of 40 characters. At the end of our albums component, we're specifying the paying, and we are passing the payer value. Yeah, this is the object, and the path that the payer should go when we click in the next page. This is a way that our pagination component is totally independent from what we are talking about, because we will navigate to the path, and this is a parameter that we are passing as an input. And as you can see here, our paging component or our pagination doesn't depend on if we are working with albums, products, or so on. So this is a totally generic pagination component. From our, we have our providers, directive, and the pipe. This we have done it many times through the application. Our albums component from here, we are using our music service. Remember, this is the album search returns an observable, and we subscribe to the result. Okay, all this was explained in the service section of these tutorials. And that's it. That's our albums component. Okay, let's go now to the album component. It's pretty similar, actually. Okay, so we are here in the album component. In this case, there is nothing new. Actually, we have been talking about everything. Let's check. Yes. So nothing new. When we arrive to the album component, we will come from the album's URL before. We will get from the route params the ID that is passed in the URL. And then we call get album info. We retrieve the album information from the music service and we subscribe to the observer. Once we get the album, we display the album and we want the format, the num, album image size, large. If we hover here and we go, remember this is a num with the different values that we want. So everything starts making sense, connecting all the dots in the application. So we have, we need to code now the two last components that are the login component. So let's go for it. Yeah, this part is really interesting because we will be using the concepts that we learned from the forms, from Angular 2 forms. And as you can see here, you have a login form. This is a local variable and using the ng form. All this you can take a look again in the forms and ng control video. Here we have an input that is required and we are specifying that the ng control is the username and the local variable username is used through form. This will keep the validity of our form always in sync. Also, our button will be enabled or disabled depending on the validity of our login form. If we click in login, we will call the login passing the variables pointing to this one here, to the username and to the password. So when we click login, we call this function, we pass the username, the password, and we use the login service. Remember that this is connected to Firebase, and Firebase, our library, returns out not observable, and depending on the result, we navigate and relaunch the page. If there is an error, we show the error. Okay, we will see this in action later on. Finally, to finish with all components, we have the registration. It's pretty similar to the login component. So let's take a look here. What do we have here? Another registration, in this case registration form. We are using ng control, local variables. Depending on the validity of the form, we disable or enable the submit button. And from here we have, we are using the get countries. Remember our country service, it returns an observable so we can subscribe and print the countries in our select that is here. We're using ng form to iterate and generate the list of options of our select. If we click in register here, we pass all the values that we need and we call user service for the registration. This again returning an observable and we subscribe, and depending on this we reload the page. So these are all the components that we need for the application. I know that I have a copy and paste the final result, but if I do it step by step, it will be super boring to you if you have followed the entire masterclass. There are no concepts new. It was more important for me to explain in every component which are the critical parts of the entire masterclass that you learned and you can apply it for a full application. So my suggestion is that you code the full application and you come to these videos once in a while to check the tips that I was doing. So see you in the next video.